A millionaire, a man who had everything money could buy, gave $350 to a beggar one cold evening, urging her to use it for food for her child. But when he saw her the next morning, it wasn't in the familiar setting of a street corner. Instead, she was standing at the grave of his beloved, the woman he had lost over 2 decades ago. Roman Lawson sat alone in a plush booth at one of New York City's most exclusive restaurants, surrounded by wealth, opulence, and an air of sophistication. Yet none of it meant anything to him. The shimmering chandeliers above, the laughter of others, the clinking of fine china and silver, everything was just an empty echo in his life. His gaze was fixed on the pouring rain outside, the droplets sliding down the glass in slow, sorrowful streaks, as if they were crying in unison with the heavy ache in his heart. The world outside was a dull, monochrome blur, and it mirrored his own soul. Forever drenched in grayness, always shrouded in shadow, perpetually devoid of warmth. It had been like this for 23 years, ever since the tragic day when his wife Lily had died. The love of his life, the person who had once brought color to his world, was gone. Roman had never been able to move past it. Her absence left an unfillable void in his chest, a hole that money, fame, or success could never begin to repair. He had built a financial empire, one that spanned continents, but none of it brought him peace. None of it could ease the deep, unrelenting pain that gnawed at him day after day. He went through the motions, business meetings, extravagant dinners, social galas, but they were nothing more than distractions, brief respites from the constant ache he carried like an invisible weight. Roman absent-mindedly swirled the wine in his glass, watching the deep red liquid circle inside the crystal vessel, hypnotic in its motion. Business deals, fine dining, exclusive events. It all tasted like ash in his mouth now. None of it had any flavor, no joy, no meaning. He exhaled a heavy sigh, the years pressing down on him like an invisible hand. Despite the immense success that defined him to the outside world, the truth was undeniable. Roman was utterly, completely alone. He had no children, not that he knew of. Lily had never wanted to talk about having kids before her passing, and Roman hadn't pressed her. He wished more than anything that he had. Now it haunted him, the thought that he had no piece of her left. Nothing tangible to hold on to. What he wouldn't give to have something, someone to protect, to love. Something that was a part of her, still alive in the world. Roman paid the bill without a second thought, his fingers trembling as he tucked his wallet back into his coat pocket. The restaurant buzzed around him. Laughter, conversation, the clatter of silverware, but to him it was nothing more than distant noise, like static on a broken radio. He slipped on his wool coat and made his way out into the rain, the chill of the night air biting at his skin. The city, alive with motion, felt like a world apart. The cold, relentless rain soaked through his coat, but it was nothing compared to the chill in his soul. The walk home took him past the places he and Lily had once frequented together. Each corner, each building a silent witness to a time when life had felt so much simpler, so much happier. Now, those memories were ghosts, and the only thing that remained of those days was a headstone in a cemetery. Tomorrow, like every other day, he would visit her grave. Paris would have been the logical place for her to rest, a city filled with beauty and light. But for reasons Roman never fully understood, she had chosen New York. Perhaps it was because the city represented the life they had built together. The life that had been abruptly, painfully cut short. As he walked along the rain-slicked sidewalk, something caught his eye. A woman huddled beneath the awning of a nearby shop. She clutched a baby to her chest, her hair wet from the downpour, her face drawn with exhaustion. The sight of her stirred something deep inside Roman, a sharp pang in his chest. He paused, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't the type to get personally involved in situations like this. Over the years, he had made countless donations to various causes, but face-to-face encounters with those in need were rare for him. Still, there was something about this woman that compelled him to stop. The way she held her baby with such tenderness, as if the fragile life in her arms was the only thing that mattered in the world. It reminded him of something he couldn't quite place. Without thinking, Roman walked toward her, his footsteps echoing softly in the empty street. He pulled out $350 in cash, the money fresh from a recent ATM withdrawal, and handed it to her with a simple, "Here, use this to buy food for you and your baby." The woman's eyes widened in surprise, her face lighting up with gratitude. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Thank you. Thank you so much." For a brief moment, Roman felt a stirring within him, a connection to this stranger, a shared understanding of pain, of loss. He didn't say anything more, simply nodded and turned to walk away. But as he continued down the street, his mind raced. The encounter had unsettled him in ways he couldn't explain. It was as though something had shifted inside him. Something he had thought was long buried had been awakened. When Roman finally reached home, he was drained. Physically, emotionally, every part of him aching. He collapsed onto his bed, the rain still tapping against the window in a soft, rhythmic lullaby. The sound was all he had left, the rain and his loneliness, the only constants in a life that had lost its meaning. He closed his eyes, but no matter how hard he tried, the image of the woman and her baby continued to replay in his mind, a haunting echo he couldn't escape. Tomorrow, like every day before it, Roman would visit Lily's grave. It had become his routine, an act of mourning he knew too well. But little did he know, this time, that routine would be shattered, and his life would be forever altered. The next morning, Roman rose early, as he always did. He dressed in his usual tailored suit, the fabric smooth and cold against his skin, and prepared for the same somber visit to the cemetery. The gray sky outside his window mirrored the heaviness in his heart. The city, still drenched from the rainstorm the night before, seemed to sigh under the weight of the storm's aftermath. Roman grabbed his coat, the familiar heaviness settling into his chest as he stepped outside, the weight of grief already pressing down on him. As he made his way to the cemetery, his thoughts kept drifting back to the young woman and her child. He couldn't understand why the encounter had affected him so deeply. Over the years, he had seen countless people in need. People just like her. But this time was different. Something about her, the way she clutched the baby with such tenderness, the look of both desperation and something else in her eyes, it unsettled him. He found himself questioning why the image lingered in his mind, why he couldn't let it go. Roman's footsteps were quiet on the wet sidewalk, each one bringing him closer to Lily's final resting place. He had walked this path 1,000 times, each visit a ritual of silence and sorrow. The cemetery was peaceful, with only the distant hum of the city and the occasional rustling of wind through the trees breaking the stillness. He knew the way to Lily's grave by heart, every stone, every curve of the path etched into his memory. The routine was always the same. He would stand before her headstone, speak to her as if she could hear him, and then leave. Alone, as always, the emptiness would settle in once more, a constant companion. But today was different. As he approached the grave, Roman's eyes fell on a figure kneeling before the headstone. His heart stuttered in his chest. It was her, the same young woman from the night before. She was cradling the baby in her arms, her back hunched, her shoulders trembling as though she were weeping. Roman froze in place, his mind racing. What was she doing here? How could she possibly know about Lily? The coincidence felt too strange, too disorienting. Confusion and unease surged within him as he took a cautious step forward. "Excuse me," Roman said, his voice low, hesitant. The woman startled at the sound of his voice, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She quickly wiped her face with the sleeve of her worn jacket, as though trying to regain some semblance of composure. "I'm sorry," she mumbled, clearly embarrassed. "I didn't mean to intrude." Roman shook his head, still reeling from the sight before him. His mind was scrambling to make sense of it all. "You were outside my restaurant yesterday," he said slowly, the memory coming back to him with stark clarity. "I gave you money." The woman nodded, her gaze dropping to the baby in her arms, as if the connection between them was explanation enough. But for Roman, it wasn't. None of this made sense. He needed to understand. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice more insistent now, a sharp edge of confusion creeping in. "How do you know Lily?" The woman hesitated, her body stiffening for a moment as though weighing her response. Roman's chest tightened, a knot forming in his stomach. She had to know something. There had to be an answer. With a deep, steadying breath, the woman finally met his gaze, and in her eyes, Roman saw something he hadn't expected, a strange mix of pain and quiet resolve. "Lily? She was my mother," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hit Roman like a thunderclap. His breath caught in his throat. The world seemed to tilt beneath him, the ground shifting as if the very foundation of everything he knew was crumbling. His mind spun, grappling with what she had just said. Lily's daughter? His wife had a daughter? How was that possible? Roman's pulse quickened and the flood of questions overwhelmed him. The young woman before him, was she telling the truth? How could this be? He hadn't known. He hadn't known Lily had a child before they met. He'd never once heard her mention anything about it. The woman shifted, her expression turning even more guarded, as though she had said all she needed to say. The baby in her arms stirred softly, and she rocked him gently, her eyes flicking nervously toward Roman, awaiting his response. Roman stood frozen, his mind struggling to comprehend the magnitude of the revelation. Everything he thought he knew about his wife, everything he had built his life around, felt suddenly irrelevant. His hands trembled as he reached out, almost instinctively, to steady himself against the cold stone of Lily's headstone. "Lily never told me," he murmured, his voice hoarse. The words were a confession, a soft echo of disbelief. "I didn't know you existed." For a moment there was silence, just the sound of the baby's soft breathing and the wind rustling through the trees. The woman's eyes softened, though the sadness in them was still unmistakable. "I know," she said quietly. It wasn't something she ever talked about. She left me when I was young. I've spent most of my life trying to find her, trying to understand why she left. I never got the answers I was looking for, until now. Roman's heart ached as the pieces began to fall into place. This was his wife's past, a past he had never known about, a past that had remained buried for all those years. He felt like a stranger in his own life, standing before a woman who, somehow, was connected to the love of his life in ways he couldn't yet understand. Roman swallowed hard, his throat tight. "You're my wife's daughter," he said again, as if saying it aloud would make it real, would help him grasp the reality of the situation. His emotions churned within him, conflicting waves of shock, sorrow, and an inexplicable pull toward this woman, this stranger who had just walked into his life in the most impossible way. The woman nodded, her eyes filled with a quiet, painful truth. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "I'm her daughter." Roman felt as though the very earth beneath him had shifted, the ground suddenly unstable. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment he wondered if he had misheard her. The words didn't make sense. He stared at the woman, Lena, with disbelief, his mind scrambling to catch up with the revelation she had just dropped on him. "Your mother?" he repeated, his voice barely a whisper, as though saying it aloud might somehow make it true. "That's impossible. Lily, she never had a child." Lena's expression remained unreadable, her face a mask of quiet resolve. She shook her head, her eyes soft but firm. "She did," she said, her voice low and steady. "She had me. She just never told you." Roman's world seemed to freeze in that instant. His chest tightened as the weight of her words began to settle in. The man who had built his life around the memory of Lily, who had mourned her loss for over 2 decades, now stood facing a reality that was utterly incomprehensible. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was saying, but nothing fit. Lily couldn't have had a child. She would have told me. She wouldn't have kept something like that from me. Or would she? His legs felt weak, and he took a slow, unsteady step back, trying to regain some semblance of control. The world, the entire fabric of his existence, seemed to tilt. "No," he muttered, more to himself than to her, his voice thick with denial. "That can't be right. There's no way." Lena's gaze didn't waver. She seemed to understand the storm of disbelief raging inside him. "I know this is hard to believe," she said softly, but with an underlying strength that was impossible to ignore. "But it's the truth. My name is Lena, and Lily was my mother." Roman's chest constricted as the reality of her words slowly sank in. His mind was a whirlwind, filled with 1,000 questions that he couldn't even begin to voice. He looked at Lena, really looked at her, and then his gaze shifted to the baby in her arms. A tiny child, innocent and unaware of the complicated web that had just been unraveled. Roman felt his heart beat faster, a rush of emotions flooding him. Confusion, anger, disbelief, but also something else. Something buried deeper. How had this happened? How could I have not known? "Why?" he asked, his voice cracking with raw emotion. Why didn't she tell me? Why would she keep this from me? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as if the truth had been hidden so deeply that even time had forgotten it. Lena looked down at the ground, the weight of the question pressing down on her. Her face was a mixture of sorrow and resignation. I don't know, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I never knew her. She died before I could meet her. I was raised by another family, far away from her. The revelation hit Roman like a physical blow. For over 20 years, he had grieved for the woman he had loved, believing he had known everything about her, the good, the bad, the past. Now he was standing in front of a stranger, a woman who claimed to be Lily's daughter, and the grief that had consumed him for so long suddenly felt like a lie built on ignorance and secrets, a truth buried so deep that it hadn't come to light until now. He inhaled sharply, trying to steady himself. His mind, racing to process the impossible, still couldn't form a coherent thought. I don't understand, he said, his voice laced with confusion. Why now? Why are you here? The questions tumbled out in rapid succession, but none of them seemed to make sense. Why would Lena show up now, after all this time? Lena's gaze met his, and for a fleeting moment, Roman thought he saw something in her eyes. Something faintly familiar. A flicker of Lily. It was the same determination, the same fire that had always been in Lily's eyes when she was driven by something she cared about. A hint of a connection that made his heart ache. I found out about her a few months ago, Lena explained, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. I've been trying to piece together the truth ever since, and when I found out where she was buried, I had to come. I had to see her, even if it was just her grave. Roman was silent for a long moment, struggling to digest the enormity of the situation. His emotions were a swirling storm of confusion, disbelief, anger, and a deep, unshakable sorrow. But under all of that, there was something else, something new and unexpected. A spark of hope that somehow, in this unexpected twist of fate, there was still a part of Lily that hadn't been lost, a part of her that had been kept hidden until now. Roman glanced down at the baby in Lena's arms. The tiny, innocent face, unmarked by the pain of the past, stared up at him, unaware of the tangled family history that was unfolding before him. If Lena was telling the truth, if Lily really had been her mother, then this child was his grandchild. A part of Lily still existed in the world, a living, breathing piece of her. Roman felt a surge of something unfamiliar, something that had been absent for years. Love, not for the grief he had carried, but for this child. This little life that had been a secret all along, and yet, in a strange way, was now his to protect. For the first time in what felt like forever, Roman felt a shift inside him. It wasn't just the unbearable weight of grief. It wasn't just the heartache of loss. It was something else. Something full of possibility, something that hadn't existed in his world for years. Lena met his gaze again, her eyes brimming with silent questions. She didn't need to speak. Her presence, the child in her arms, said everything. For the first time in over 2 decades, Roman didn't feel so alone. Roman didn't know what to say. His mind was a blur of confusion, unable to catch up with the truth that had just been thrust upon him. He stood frozen, staring at Lena, as if she were a ghost from a past he had never truly known. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves around the cemetery, but all he could hear was the pounding of his heart in his ears, the rhythm of a man on the verge of losing himself. Lena shifted the baby in her arms, and the small, almost imperceptible sound of a soft whimper seemed to cut through the heavy silence. That noise, fragile, innocent, snapped Roman out of his daze. It was as though the baby, in its vulnerability, had reminded him of everything he had lost and everything he might still gain. "Dad!" Roman's voice was barely a whisper, hoarse and ragged. How is this possible? The questions were there, swirling in his mind like a storm, but he couldn't find the words. Betrayal rippled through him, as though the very memory of Lily had been distorted. The woman he had mourned for so long, the love of his life, now felt like someone entirely different. His heart ached as he tried to piece together the fragments of the woman he had thought he knew. But even in his confusion, one thing was painfully clear. Lena believed every word she was saying. I know it's a lot to take in, Lena said, her voice gentle but strong. I've spent my whole life trying to understand too. But I'm telling you, Roman, the truth. Lily was my mother. Roman's chest tightened at the words. It felt as if the ground beneath him was shifting again, threatening to swallow him whole. Why didn't she tell me? He muttered, barely audible, his thoughts tumbling out. The thought that Lily had kept something so monumental, so life-altering from him was unbearable. How could she have done this? He had spent years lying awake, haunted by the what-ifs, the dreams of a life they could have had together. Now, those dreams were tainted, forever changed by the realization that his entire understanding of Lily's life had been incomplete. Lena shook her head slowly, her eyes filled with a deep empathy, as though she could feel the weight of his grief. I don't know why she kept it from you, she said softly. I never had the chance to ask her. She passed away when I was still a baby. Roman's mind raced as he tried to make sense of everything. There had to be more to this. There had to be an explanation that could explain the magnitude of what he was hearing. He took a step closer to her, his eyes searching for answers. Who raised you then? If Lily was your mother, why didn't I know about you? Lena's expression darkened for a moment, and she glanced down at the ground, her face shifting with the burden of memories she had long carried alone. After she died, I was put into the care of another family, she said, her voice tinged with sadness. I grew up not knowing anything about my real parents until recently. All I had was a name, bits of information I could piece together. I didn't even know where to start looking for you until a few months ago. Roman felt his heart constrict in his chest. All these years, he had lived his life believing he knew everything about Lily, her secrets, her dreams, the truth of who she had been. But now, in one brief moment, he realized how little he truly understood. How many chapters of her life had I missed? So you came here looking for answers? Roman asked, his voice a little softer now, but still full of that confusion, that desperate need to understand. Lena nodded, her face softening with a quiet understanding. Yes. I wanted to understand who she was. I wanted to know why she kept me a secret. And when I found out where she was buried, I knew I had to come. I had to see her. Even if it was just her grave. Roman's gaze fell to the headstone before him, the cold, impersonal stone that had borne his wife's name for so many years. It had been his ritual, his painful pilgrimage, to visit, to talk to her, to try and make peace with her absence. But standing here now, with Lena and the baby, that ritual felt hollow. His grief, his memories, everything he thought he understood about Lily felt shattered. The woman he had mourned for 2 decades was now a stranger to him, in ways he had never imagined. He took a deep breath, his mind racing as it searched for something solid to hold on to in the midst of this storm. And this baby, Roman's voice cracked slightly as he gestured toward the child in Lena's arms. Is this my grandchild? Lena looked down at the baby, a soft smile tugging at her lips as she cradled him close. For a moment, her expression softened, the tension in her body easing. Yes, she said, her voice quiet but full of certainty. His name is Lucian. Roman stared at the baby, still so small, so fragile in Lena's arms. The sight of him, innocent, unaware of the storm swirling around him, stirred something deep inside Roman. His heart swelled with a mixture of shock, disbelief, and something else he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Lucian, this tiny child, was a living connection to Lily, to the life they could have had, to the future that had been stolen from them. A life that had been hidden from him, but now, somehow, had a chance of being embraced. Roman felt the strangest sensation, an unfamiliar warmth spreading through his chest. It wasn't just the ache of grief. It wasn't just the shock of revelation. It was something else. A new beginning, however tentative. For the first time in years, he felt like maybe, just maybe, there was something worth living for again. Lucian wasn't just a baby. He was a piece of Lily, a part of the woman Roman had loved. And now, standing here in the rain, with this fragile new life before him, Roman realized he wasn't as alone as he had thought. Roman's mind was spinning, the gravity of what Lena had just revealed weighing on him like a crushing tide. For so long, he had been tethered to a past that no longer existed, to a woman he thought he knew completely, And now, here he was, standing in front of a stranger who claimed to be his daughter, with a baby who, impossibly, might be his grandchild. He wanted to understand, but the tangled emotions, grief, betrayal, confusion, clouded his thoughts. His emotions had shifted. The soft whisper of the wind carried the scent of rain-soaked earth, but for Roman, everything around him felt muted, distant. The cemetery, the stone, the life he had built. All of it seemed to fade as his mind clung to the one thing that refused to let go. "Why? I still don't understand," Roman said finally, his voice much quieter, the sharp edge of his anger fading into something softer, something more vulnerable. "Lily never told me she was pregnant. How could she have kept this from me?" Lena's face tightened, the sadness in her eyes deepening as she looked at Roman. There was empathy there, but also a sense of shared pain. "I don't know why she kept it from you," Lena said, her voice soft but steady. "I wish I had the answers, but I can only tell you what I know. Lily never talked about it, and I never knew her. I know she kept me a secret, and I don't know why. Maybe she thought you wouldn't want me, or maybe, like she said, she was trying to protect you." Roman closed his eyes for a moment, the hurt too much to bear all at once. The thought that Lily had kept such a monumental part of her life from him, a life he could have been a part of, stung in a way that no amount of money or success ever had. She had protected him from something. But why? Had she truly thought he wouldn't want this life? Was he really the man he thought he was? "Protect me," Roman repeated, his voice rough. "She thought keeping this from me was protection." Lena nodded gently. "I don't know her reasons," she said quietly, "but maybe she believed that it would be easier for you, for both of you, if she just kept it quiet. Maybe she thought if she told you it would change everything. Maybe she thought you wouldn't love her the same. I don't know, Roman, but I know she loved you. I know she wanted to keep you safe, to give you what you wanted in life. She never wanted to burden you with this." Roman stood still, feeling a coldness wash over him. The weight of everything he had thought he knew about Lily now seemed like a carefully constructed illusion. She had been his partner, his equal, but now it felt like there were things about her. So many things he would never understand. Had he really known her at all? Lena's eyes softened, sensing the storm raging inside him. "I don't want you to hate her for this, Roman. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know the truth. And maybe, now that you know, you can find a way to understand her, to understand me." Roman shook his head slowly, trying to process it all. There was too much, too many conflicting emotions. His heart felt like it was in a vice, crushed between the love he had for Lily and the betrayal he felt now. But there was something else, too. Something deeper, hidden in the chaos. For the first time in years, Roman felt the stirrings of something more than just grief. There was a spark of responsibility, of connection. He had spent so long in mourning, so wrapped up in his own loss, that he had forgotten what it meant to truly live. Now, with Lena here, with the baby, he had a chance to reclaim something that had been lost to him, a piece of Lily, a legacy he never knew existed. "What do you want from me?" Roman asked, his voice quiet, but the weight of the question settled between them like an anchor. Lena paused for a moment, her eyes meeting his, unwavering. "I don't want anything from you," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I just want to know where I came from. I want to understand the woman who was my mother. And I think you deserve to know the truth about your wife." Roman looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time he saw a reflection of Lily in her face. Something that was familiar, something that spoke of a love he had lost but that had somehow endured. He felt a strange pull toward her, a sense of responsibility toward the life she had created, the family he never knew he had. "I'd never got to say goodbye," Roman whispered, almost to himself. "I never got to have the life with her I thought I would. But maybe I can still have something with you." Lena's eyes filled with emotion, a silent understanding passing between them. She wasn't asking for anything. She wasn't looking for forgiveness or answers or promises. She simply wanted him to understand, and that, Roman realized, was all she needed. The silence stretched between them, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people, two strangers starting to come to terms with the past and the future. There was a bond forming between them, fragile but real. For the first time in years, Roman allowed himself to hope. Not just for the past he had lost, but for the future he hadn't known he still had a chance to build. Lena looked down at the baby in her arms, and Roman followed her gaze, his heart swelling with something deep and undeniable. Lucian, his grandchild. A connection to Lily, to the life he had never fully lived, but one that was now within his reach. "Maybe we can try," Roman said softly, looking up at Lena with a newfound resolve. "Maybe we can try to figure this out together." And for the first time in a long while, Roman felt a spark of possibility flicker inside him. Roman stood there, processing Lena's words, the weight of everything pressing in on him. He had thought that finding closure would come from the simple act of moving on, of accepting the loss of Lily and the life they might have had. But now, standing here in front of Lena and holding Lucian's tiny existence in his arms, Roman realized that closure was never going to be that simple. This was something entirely different. Her calmness unsettled him. Lena had been through so much, uncovered truths that had been hidden, and yet she stood there offering him nothing but honesty. Her restraint, her lack of demand, made him feel both inadequate and somehow grateful. She wasn't here to force anything on him, she was just searching for understanding, just like he was. Roman opened his mouth, but the words came out in a low whisper, struggling to form. "You've been through so much, and you came here to find the truth. But you're right, Lena, you didn't ask for anything." His eyes fell to Lucian, the small, peaceful bundle of life in her arms. "I didn't expect this either, but I can't ignore it. I can't ignore that he's here. He's part of her, part of me, part of us." Lena met his gaze, her expression softening, as if she were quietly acknowledging that there was something in the air now, something that could never be denied. "I know it's a lot, and I never expected you to just accept it. But I thought you deserved to know. You deserve to know your own truth. You deserve to know about her, about the choices she made." Roman clenched his fists by his sides, trying to steady himself. "But I don't understand, Lena. Why didn't she tell me? Why couldn't she trust me with this? We shared everything." Lena's eyes darkened, filled with a sadness that mirrored his. "I think maybe she was scared, Roman. Scared of how it would change everything between you. I think she believed, deep down, that telling you would hurt you both. She never got to explain herself, and now I can't explain it for her. All I know is that she did love you." Roman's breath caught at those words. They reverberated through him, pulling at the fragments of himself that had been shattered over the years. She loved you. He'd never questioned that Lily had loved him, but this, the secret, the unspoken truth of a hidden life, felt like a betrayal he hadn't seen coming. A betrayal that, in some twisted way, might have been for the right reasons, or at least, in Lily's mind, the right ones. Looking at Lena, there was a flicker of something else in Roman. Regret, yes, but something else too. A connection. He had lost so much with Lily, but maybe, just maybe, there was still something to salvage, and maybe that something was here, right in front of him. Maybe it was Lena, maybe it was Lucian. "I don't know if I can forgive her for keeping this from me," Roman said quietly, but his voice was more vulnerable than angry. "But I'm not going to turn my back on you. On Lucian. He's my grandson, and that's a bond I can't just ignore." Lena's eyes widened, and her lips trembled slightly, as though his words were exactly what she had hoped to hear, but hadn't dared to believe. "You mean that?" Roman nodded slowly, his gaze locked on the baby. "I may not have the answers yet, but I'm here. I'm not going to walk away. I just need some time to process. This is a lot." Lena smiled faintly, a quiet relief washing over her. "I understand. And you don't have to rush anything. I'm not asking for anything more than what you can give." Roman looked up at her, his eyes weary but determined. "Maybe I'll never understand why Lily kept this from me, but I'll try to understand you and Lucian. I'll try." For the first time since Lena had revealed the truth, Roman felt a flicker of hope. Small, fragile, but undeniable. He had been living in the shadow of Lily's death for so long, clinging to a version of her that no longer existed. But now, with Lena here, with Lucian, He had the chance to build something new, something that could honor the memory of the woman he had loved, and perhaps in some way finally heal the wounds that had been festering for so long. Lena took a small step closer, careful not to overwhelm him, but the gesture spoke volumes. She didn't need Roman to be perfect. She didn't need him to have all the answers. She just needed him to be present, and in that moment, she knew he would be. The baby stirred slightly in her arms, and she adjusted him gently. Roman watched, a knot tightening in his chest, but it wasn't just pain this time. It was something else. Responsibility, connection, the understanding that his life wasn't as empty as it had felt for the last few years. He had been adrift, but now he wasn't alone, and maybe that was the first step toward finding peace. "I'm not sure what happens next," Roman said, his voice quieter now. "But we'll figure it out, one step at a time." Lena's eyes glistened as she nodded. One step at a time. And for the first time in a long while, Roman felt a glimmer of something. Hope, maybe, or just the warmth of connection. Emerging from the ashes of everything he had lost. It wasn't a perfect solution, and it didn't erase the years of pain, but it was a beginning. And in the end, sometimes that's all anyone really needed, a beginning. Roman stood by the window, staring out at the darkened city below, the rain now coming down harder, blurring the outlines of the buildings. It was a familiar view, one he had seen countless times before, but tonight it felt different. The familiar had become unfamiliar. His whole world had shifted in the span of a few hours, and he was still trying to catch his breath, to make sense of it all. His thoughts kept returning to Lena's words, to the way she had looked at him when he offered to be part of her life. There was a quiet intensity to her, something that had been forged through years of searching, of trying to piece together the fragments of a life she had never fully understood. But now, standing on the precipice of something new, she had made her choice. We can try. And so too had he. The weight of that decision was not lost on him. He had spent so long building his empire, his world of control and certainty, but none of it had ever filled the emptiness left by Lily's death. All those years of pushing forward, of keeping busy to avoid confronting the pain, had left him with a hollow victory. Now, with Lena and Lucian in his life, he was being given something more real, more complicated than anything he had built before. They were his chance to start over, to rebuild not just the pieces of his life, but the parts of himself he had lost. But there was a nagging ache in his chest that wouldn't go away. He kept thinking about Lily, thinking about how she had kept this from him. The woman he had shared his life with, the woman who had been his partner in everything, had kept a monumental secret, and it wasn't just the secret that stung. It was the absence of answers, the absence of any explanation. Why hadn't she trusted him enough? Why hadn't she confided in him, especially about something as important as this? The thought of it twisted something deep inside him, the old pain rearing its head once more. He didn't want to feel this way, but it was hard not to. It was hard not to feel betrayed when so much of his life had been built on the belief that they had shared everything, even the darkest parts of themselves. But now he saw the cracks, the hidden things Lily had kept from him. Still, something inside him told him that this wasn't about her anymore. This was about them. This was about Lena, about Lucian. Roman took a slow, steadying breath. It was easy to get lost in the past, to keep searching for the answers that might never come. But maybe it was time to stop looking back. Maybe it was time to look forward, to see what was left of the life he had once dreamed of. A life that, while irrevocably changed, could still hold something meaningful. Turning from the window, Roman crossed the room to his desk, where a picture of Lily sat in a frame. She was smiling, her eyes full of life, full of promise. He reached out and traced his fingers over the glass. That was the woman he had loved. But the woman who had walked away, the one who had kept this secret from him, was a different person, one he couldn't entirely understand. But Lena and Lucien, they were here now, and that had to count for something. He looked at the picture again, this time with a sense of finality. "I'll never understand," he whispered to the silence of the room, "but I'll try, for them." Roman turned and walked toward the door, his mind clearer than it had been in years. There was a new path ahead of him, and whether he had the answers or not, he wasn't going to let it slip away. But Roman knew that taking the first step was the most important part. He wasn't just doing this for Lena, for Lucian, or even for Lily anymore. He was doing it for himself. He needed to find peace. He needed to rebuild a part of himself that he had let slip away in the years of grief and isolation. Roman sat down at his desk, picking up his phone with a sense of purpose. He dialed Lena's number, his fingers trembling slightly as he waited for the call to connect. The sound of the ringing felt louder than it should have, like a drumbeat in his chest. When Lena answered, there was a brief pause before she spoke. "Roman?" "Yes," he said, his voice steady but edged with emotion. "It's me. I wanted to talk about what we discussed yesterday. I've had some time to think, and I'm ready to take the next step." There was silence on the other end for a moment, and Roman could feel the tension building. Lena had probably been expecting him to pull back, to retreat into the safety of his old life, but this time, he wasn't going to. Not this time. "Roman, she began, but he cut her off, gently. "I'm not going to turn my back on you, Lena," he said. "I can't. I know I've missed so much, but I'm here now, for you and for Lucian. I want to be part of your lives. I know it won't be easy, but I'm willing to try. And I hope you'll let me." Lena was quiet for a long moment. Roman could almost hear the wheels turning in her mind, the careful consideration of his words. Finally, she spoke. "I don't know what this is going to look like, Roman," she said, her voice soft. "I've spent so long doing everything on my own, but I think I'm ready to try too." Relief flooded through Roman, and for the first time in days he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. There was a long road ahead, full of unknowns and hurdles, but this was the first step in a new direction, a chance to start again. "I'm glad," Roman replied, his voice thick with emotion. "We'll take it one step at a time." Lena paused before saying, "You should come by soon. I think Lucian would like to meet you." Roman smiled, a rare feeling of warmth creeping up through him. "I'll be there," he said. "Soon." As the call ended, Roman sat back in his chair, a quiet sense of resolve settling over him. There would be no more looking back, no more wondering what could have been. The future was right in front of him, and it was time to embrace it, no matter how uncertain it seemed. He had a daughter, he had a grandson, and they were the family he had left. Lena's eyes flickered with surprise as she glanced at the journal, then back at Roman. She didn't touch it right away, as if unsure what to make of it. "You've had this all this time?" she asked quietly, her voice a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Roman nodded slowly, his fingers tapping nervously on the edge of his coffee cup. "I never had the heart to read it. Not until now. But when you told me about Lily, about why she kept you from me, I thought maybe understanding her better would help me understand everything that happened. Why she made the choices she did," he explained, his voice tinged with regret. Lena glanced down at the journal again. "What did you find in it?" she asked, her gaze softening slightly. Roman swallowed hard before answering. "There's an entry just before she died. She was afraid. She was terrified, actually. She didn't think I could handle the news. She thought telling me about you, about the baby, would destroy everything we had," he said, the words heavy with the weight of his own grief and disbelief. Lena looked away for a moment, her hand resting on Lucian's back. "I can understand why she would be afraid," she murmured. "She probably didn't want to burden you with something so big when you were already dealing with so much, but it doesn't make it right." She looked back at Roman, then, her expression conflicted. "She didn't trust you enough to share that part of her life with you." Roman nodded, the pain of the truth settling deeper into his chest. "I've been wrestling with that," he admitted. "I've been angry, confused. I thought it was betrayal. But reading that, I realized it wasn't about betrayal. It was about her trying to protect me. It doesn't make it hurt any less, but I understand now. I understand her fear." Lena's eyes softened as she looked at him, her walls seeming to lower just a bit. "She was trying to protect you, but in doing so, she kept you from knowing me, from knowing Lucian." Her voice was quiet, but there was a trace of sadness there, too. Roman reached out slowly, placing his hand on the table, just inches from hers. "I can't change what happened, Lena. I can't change the years I lost, the time I should have spent with you and Lucian. But I'm here now, I don't want to keep pretending like the past doesn't matter. I can't change it, but I can try to make up for it. For you. For him." His gaze shifted briefly to Lucian, who was still quietly gazing up at him. Lena was silent for a long moment, her eyes searching his face as if looking for something. An assurance, maybe, that this wasn't just a fleeting gesture. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but firm. "I don't know what this is going to look like, Roman. I don't know how we move forward from here, but I can't deny that a part of me has always wondered what it would have been like if you had been there for me, for all of it." Roman's heart tightened as he heard her words. The thought of all the moments he had missed, all the years she had grown up without him, weighed heavily on him. But at the same time, there was something in Lena's voice. Something that told him maybe, just maybe, they could build something now. A future. If not entirely whole, then at least worth trying for. "I'm not asking you to forget the past, Lena," Roman said quietly, "but I am asking for a chance. A chance to be here now. For you, for Lucian." Lena nodded slowly, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of vulnerability and resolve. "We can try," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But we'll take it slow, one step at a time." Roman smiled softly, the weight on his chest easing slightly. "One step at a time," he repeated, feeling a small flicker of hope begin to burn again. As Lena shifted Lucian in her arms, the baby began to squirm, waking up from his nap. Roman found himself staring at the small, innocent face before him, the realization settling in that he had a chance to be part of his life, of both of their lives. As soon as he was upright alone, he reached his arms out to Lena. "We can start by getting to know each other," Roman suggested, his voice tinged with an optimism that felt both fragile and necessary. "Tell me about Lucian. What's he like? What's he into?" Lena smiled as she gazed down at her son, her face softening. "Well, he's very curious, always reaching for things, and he loves being outside. It's like he's fascinated by the world already." Roman chuckled, the sound a little rusty but genuine. "Sounds like a curious little one. I think he and I are going to get along just fine." Lena met his gaze then, and for the first time there was a shared understanding between them. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were too many questions, too much history between them. But as they both looked at Lucian, who was now happily cooing in his mother's arms, Roman felt a sense of resolve settle in. They weren't starting from scratch, they were starting from here, and that was enough. Lena's gaze lingered on the journal, her fingers still hovering above it, as if she were considering whether to open it or leave it closed forever. After a few moments, she sighed and slowly pushed it back toward Roman. "I don't know if I'm ready to read this yet," she admitted softly. "It feels like it might be too much to handle right now." Her voice trembled slightly, and Roman could sense the conflict within her. "I understand," he said quietly. "You don't have to read it. It's not something you should feel pressured to do. It's just a piece of the puzzle, I guess. But it doesn't have to define everything between us." Lena nodded slowly, her fingers curling around the edge of her coffee cup. "I think I've spent my whole life trying to make sense of the pieces I've been given. And now, it's like I've got more pieces, but they're not fitting together the way I imagined." Roman felt a pang of guilt. He had spent years locked in his own grief, consumed by the idea of what was lost with Lily's death, never imagining how much the past had affected Lena, how many questions she had carried with her. I'm sorry," Roman said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "For all the pain you've carried, for not being here for you, for everything." Lena looked up at him, her expression softening. "You don't need to apologize, Roman. None of this is easy. It's not just on you, it's a lot of things, all tangled up." Roman gave a small nod. He didn't know how to fix the tangled mess of emotions between them, but he was willing to try. He was determined to make this work, to be part of her life in whatever way he could. "I just want you to know, Lena," Roman said, his voice steady now, "that I'm not going anywhere. I'm here. If you need time, I'll give it to you. But I want you to know, whatever happens, I'm here for you and Lucian. I won't walk away again." Lena seemed to consider his words carefully, her eyes searching his face. Then, after a long moment, she sighed and looked down at Lucian, who was starting to fuss a little in her arms. "I'm trying, Roman," she said, her voice soft, but there was a firmness behind it. "I'm really trying. But it's going to take time. You have to understand that." I do, he replied. I'm not asking for anything more than that. I just want to be here, however you need me to be. There was a slight shift in the air between them then, a quiet understanding that maybe, just maybe, they could figure this out, step by step. Roman wasn't sure what the future would look like, but he knew this. He was done running from the past. He was ready to face it, with all its mess and complications, and maybe, just maybe, build something new with the family he'd never known he had. Lena looked up at him then, her eyes still cautious, but there was something softer there too, a glimmer of hope. One step at a time, she repeated, her voice more resolute now. But if you really want to be part of my life, then I think we can try. Roman smiled, his heart lightening for the first time in a long while. One step at a time, he echoed. As the conversation drifted to lighter topics, Lucian's newest milestones, some of the small moments Lena had experienced over the last few years, there was a sense of tentative peace between them. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, but more comfortable, like the first steps of a new beginning. And that, for now, was enough. Roman smiled gently, trying to ease the tension in the air. Of course, Lena, I'm glad you called. His heart was pounding, his mind running through the possible scenarios. He wanted to be there for her, whatever it was she needed to say. Lena nodded, but there was something in her eyes, a conflict, a weight, that he couldn't ignore. She glanced down at Lucien, who was quietly watching them, his little hands resting on the edge of the stroller. I don't know how to say this, Lena began, her voice faltering slightly as she looked up at Roman. But I think it's time I tell you the full truth about why I was so angry when I first found you. Roman's stomach tightened. He didn't expect this. He had thought they were finally beginning to move forward, but now it felt like they were teetering on the edge of something new, something potentially painful. He stepped closer, his eyes softening as he spoke. Whatever it is, Lena, you don't have to be afraid to tell me. I want to understand. You don't have to carry this alone. Lena swallowed hard, the words clearly not easy for her to say. She took a deep breath before continuing. When I found out you were my father, when I really understood who you were, I thought that maybe I could just walk away from everything, just leave it all behind. But then I couldn't. I couldn't walk away from the fact that I needed answers. Needed to know why you weren't there for me, why you weren't part of my life. Roman's chest tightened with guilt and shame, the sting of his past mistakes hanging over him. I know I wasn't there, Lena. I failed you, and I can't change that. But I've been trying every day to make up for it. Lena met his gaze then, her eyes filled with a mixture of hurt and understanding. I'm not angry at you anymore, Roman, she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. But I was, for a long time, and I think part of me thought that if I could just hate you enough, it would make it easier to forgive you, easier to make sense of everything that happened. Roman's heart cracked as he heard the weight of her words. He had never realized the depth of the pain she had carried, the anger, the confusion, the sense of abandonment. I've spent so many years feeling like I was the one who was robbed, Lena continued, her voice trembling slightly. But now, I see that you were too. You lost me, and you lost the chance to be there for me, and maybe that's why I've been so scared. Because what if this, what we're trying to build now, is just another thing I'm going to lose? Roman reached out, his hand hovering close to hers. He didn't want to push, but he needed her to know how much he understood, how much he regretted the years they had lost. I don't want to lose you, Lena, he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. I don't want to lose anything else. I'm not going anywhere, I swear. Lena looked down at Lucien, her fingers brushing the edge of the stroller. After a moment, she nodded. I believe you, she said softly, her voice raw. But it's still going to take time. I need to know that I can trust you, that you're not just filling a space for me because you feel guilty. Roman's heart ached, but he understood. He had to prove himself to her, not just through words, but through action. He couldn't rush her healing, he couldn't undo the past, but he could try to build something new, one day at a time. I get that, he said, his voice quiet but firm. I'm not asking for your trust all at once. I know I have to earn it, and I'll do whatever it takes. For a moment, the silence between them was filled with the weight of their conversation. It wasn't easy, but it was honest, and that, for now, was enough. Lena looked at him then, her gaze softening, and for the first time in a while, Roman saw the hint of a smile tug at the corner of her lips. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not giving up, for being here." Roman smiled back, his heart swelling with gratitude and hope. "I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together." As they stood there, the sunlight breaking through the trees, there was a sense of quiet understanding between them, a fragile but hopeful bond, one that neither of them was willing to let go of. And for the first time in a long time, Roman felt like he was finally on the path to something real. Something that could heal both him and Lena, piece by piece. Roman's mind was reeling as he processed the letter. It was like a puzzle piece he hadn't known was missing, and now that it was in front of him, it only made the picture more complicated. He had always believed that he and Lily had been in sync when it came to their future, that they had shared the same vision, but this letter, this secret, turned everything upside down. He glanced at Lena, who was watching him with a mix of understanding and sorrow. She must have felt the same confusion, the same sense of being caught between two worlds, one where she had been kept in the shadows, and one where Roman was just beginning to understand the depths of her mother's decisions. "I never knew," Roman whispered, more to himself than to her. "I never knew she felt like that. I never knew she thought I'd walk away if she told me. I thought we had been honest with each other." Lena shifted slightly, her voice calm but laced with sadness. "I don't think it was about honesty, Roman. It was about fear. She was afraid of how everything would change. Maybe she thought if she told you, it would change everything. Her life, yours, and most of all, how you saw her. And maybe she thought, in the end, that it would be easier for her to handle alone. But look at what happened. It wasn't easier for either of you." Roman closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of the letter settling heavily in his chest. It felt like a betrayal, but also like something much more tragic, a decision made out of love, even if it had been the wrong one. He had always thought that the pain of losing Lily was the hardest thing he'd ever had to bear, but now he could see that there had been a different kind of loss, one that had happened long before her death, and it was a loss that had affected both Lena and himself. "I should have known," Roman muttered, the guilt creeping in. "I should have talked to her more. I should have asked her more questions, tried to understand her better. But I didn't. And now, I'm just trying to catch up." Lena reached out, her hand resting on his. It was a simple gesture, but it carried so much weight. "You're not the only one who's been trying to catch up, Roman. I've been doing the same thing my whole life, trying to make sense of why she kept me from you, why she chose to carry that secret alone. But now I think I understand. She wasn't just protecting you. She was protecting herself too. From everything." Roman's chest tightened, a painful knot forming as he considered the enormity of what he had just learned. Lily had loved him, but she had been afraid. Afraid of losing him, afraid of how a child would change their lives. And in the process, she had locked herself into a lie, one that would haunt both of them for years. "I'm sorry," Roman said, his voice cracking slightly as he turned to Lena. "I'm so sorry. I don't know how to make up for all this. I don't know how to fix it." Lena looked at him, her eyes softening, and for the first time, Roman saw the faintest glimmer of forgiveness. "You don't have to fix it. You can't. But you can be here now. You can be a part of my life, and Lucian's." Roman nodded, a wave of emotion washing over him. "I want to be. I really do. And I promise you, I'm not going anywhere. I know this won't be easy, but I want to try." Lena's gaze lingered on him, and after a long pause, she finally spoke. "I think that's all we can do. Try." They sat there in silence for a moment, the air thick with all the things that had been left unsaid for years. The past was still there, lurking between them, but in that moment, it didn't feel as overwhelming. Maybe because now they had the truth, or maybe because, for the first time in a long while, they were finally ready to face it together. Roman glanced down at Lucian, who was still peacefully sleeping in his stroller. He was small, innocent, and unaware of the tangled web of history surrounding him. But Roman was determined to be there for him, for Lena. He was ready to step into this new role, whatever it would take. "I'll be the grandfather he needs," Roman promised quietly, his voice full of resolve. "And I'll be here for you, Lena, for both of you. We'll figure this out, step by step." Lena smiled faintly, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "Step by step," she repeated softly. Roman felt a small sense of peace settle in his chest. They had taken a big step today, one that wasn't easy, but one that felt like it might lead them to something better, something real. The weight of that realization settled heavily on Roman. All these years, he had blamed himself for not being there when Lily needed him, for not understanding the full scope of her fears and the depth of the secret she had kept. But now, he saw how one careless comment, one offhand remark, had shaped their entire future in ways he never could have imagined. He set the letter down, his hands trembling as he thought about how easily words could shape lives. How a moment of fear, a decision made out of love, could tear apart everything you thought you understood about your own life. He'd never thought something so small, a comment made in passing, something so far removed from the weight it had later carried, could create such consequences. Roman leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath. Lily had been trying to protect him, and she'd carried that burden for so long, alone. He understood that now, but that understanding didn't make the hurt any easier. It didn't erase the lost years, the lost opportunities to be there for Lena, to be there for her. He stood up, walking over to the window and looking out at the city below. The lights twinkled in the distance, but they felt distant, unreachable, like his own attempts to turn back time. He could almost feel Lily's presence in the room, a ghost haunting him. Would things have been different if they had had those conversations? If they had been honest about their fears and desires? If he had been more present, more aware of the weight of their unspoken words? The sound of his phone vibrating on the desk broke him from his thoughts. He walked over and saw a message from Lena. "Can we talk tomorrow? There's something I need to share." The words immediately set his heart racing. What now? Was there more she needed to tell him? More pieces of the puzzle he hadn't even considered? Roman stared at the message for a long moment before replying, his fingers shaking as he typed. "Of course, I'll see you tomorrow." The next day they met at a quiet corner cafe once more, the air crisp with the early signs of autumn. Lena was already seated when Roman arrived, her expression unreadable. Lawson was once again with her, but this time the baby was wide awake, gazing around curiously, oblivious to the serious conversation that was about to unfold. "Hey," Roman greeted, his voice warm but his heart was heavy. He could sense that something was different this time, something had changed. Lena smiled faintly as she looked up at him, her eyes carrying a quiet sadness that mirrored his own. "Hey, thanks for meeting me." Roman nodded and took a seat across from her. "Of course, what's on your mind?" Lena hesitated for a moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup before she spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about what we've talked about everything, and I realized something that I think I need to tell you." Roman leaned in slightly, feeling that familiar weight of anticipation. Whatever she had to say, he was ready to hear it. "I don't want to hold anything back anymore," she continued, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of emotion. "You were right, we both have so much to learn from each other, and we have a lot to work through, but I've been holding something else in, something I've never told you." Roman furrowed his brow, the tension in his chest rising. "What is it, Lena? What's going on?" Lena took a deep breath, her gaze shifting between Roman and the baby in her arms. Lawson was still watching the world around him, completely unaware of the heavy conversation his presence was somehow at the center of. "I've been trying to protect myself, too," Lena said quietly. "From you, from the truth. I didn't want to get my hopes up, to think that I could have what I missed out on with my mom, with you. But the truth is, I do want that. I want a real family, and I don't want to keep pretending that I can be okay with just existing on the edges of things." Roman's breath caught in his throat. "Lena, you don't have to—" "I'm not finished," she interrupted softly, her voice breaking slightly. "I'm not finished because I've been trying to figure out what it means to have a family, and what it means to be a part of one. I've been scared that you would walk away, that you would think this was too much, but I can't keep being afraid of that, and I need you to understand. I need you to understand that I'm not asking you to fix things. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be here, to be real with me." Roman's chest tightened, his heart swelling with an emotion he couldn't quite place. Was it relief? Regret? Or maybe just a deep, aching love for this woman who was trying so hard to bridge the gap between them? "I'm here, Lena," Roman said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. We'll figure it out, I promise." Lena's eyes softened as she met his gaze, her hand reaching out to rest on the table between them. "It's going to take time," she whispered, "but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to try with you. For Lucian. For us." Roman nodded, his hand closing over hers. For the first time, the weight of the past didn't feel quite as heavy. There was no quick fix, no easy solution to everything they had lost. But there was hope, and hope, for the first time, felt like enough. Roman's heart ached as he watched Lena interact with Lucian, her natural ease with him a stark reminder of the years he had missed out on. He wanted to be angry, wanted to lash out at the time that had been lost, but he knew that wouldn't get him anywhere. This was the moment that mattered, the here and now. He was here with them, and that was something he couldn't take for granted. As they settled into the waiting area, Lena sat next to him, Lucian still in his stroller, fussing a little as the minutes ticked by. Roman's gaze kept drifting back to the baby, his grandson, and he couldn't help but feel a swell of affection for the little boy who, despite everything, felt like family. He reached out and lightly touched Lucian's hand, and the baby immediately grasped his finger with a surprising strength for someone so young. Roman smiled, his heart giving a small, unexpected flutter. Lena noticed his reaction and gave him a small, quiet smile. "He's got a good grip, doesn't he?" Roman chuckled softly, looking up at Lena. "He does. It's amazing how strong they are already. It's hard to believe he's still so small." Lena's smile lingered, but it faded a little as she looked down at Lucian. "You get used to it," she said softly, almost to herself. "But it's also a reminder of how quickly things change, how much you have to grow up when you're the one taking care of someone else." Roman didn't respond right away, knowing the weight behind her words. He understood what she meant, perhaps more than he had before. The sacrifices she had made, the life she had built on her own, it wasn't easy. And now, here he was, trying to step in when everything was already so complicated. Before he could respond, the nurse called Lucian's name, and they both stood up. Roman's hand instinctively hovered near the stroller, wanting to help, to show that he was involved, but unsure if it was the right move. He didn't want to overstep. Lena turned to him with a small nod. "It's okay. You can come back with us, if you want." Roman smiled, grateful for the invitation. "I'd like that." As they followed the nurse into the examination room, Roman couldn't help but feel both out of place and deeply connected to this tiny moment. Everything felt raw. His emotions, his desire to make things right, to find a way into this new life, one piece at a time. The doctor soon arrived, a friendly middle-aged woman with a warm smile, and after a few routine questions and checks, it was clear Lucian was doing well. As the doctor wrapped things up, she gave them both some instructions for Lucian's next checkup and reminded Lena to keep an eye on his teething. Roman watched Lena as she listened intently, making notes in her phone, her attention solely on Lucian. He could see the weight of motherhood in her, the careful balance between being attentive and tired, the quiet strength in her voice. She had come so far on her own, and now he was standing at the edge of her world, hoping she would let him in. As they walked back to the waiting area, Roman couldn't help but feel a little closer to her than before. It was a small step, but it was a step forward. A little later, as they stood in the parking lot, Roman finally spoke, his voice quieter than usual. I meant it when I said I want to be here. I want to be part of your life, Lena, and Lucian's. I can't change the past, but I can still try to be the father and grandfather you deserve." Lena looked up at him, her expression unreadable for a moment, and then she nodded slowly. "I know you can't change it, and I don't expect you to." Her voice softened. "But I appreciate you showing up, Roman. It means more than I can say." Roman's chest tightened with something he couldn't quite name. Relief, hope, maybe even a little fear. But it was there, real and tangible. They were starting to build something, even if it was just the beginning. "Thank you for letting me be here," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Lena gave him a small, knowing smile before she turned to buckle Lucian into the car. Roman followed her, his mind swirling with possibilities for what came next. They still had a long way to go, but for the first time Roman felt like he wasn't standing on the outside looking in. He was in this, with Lena, with Lucian. He was a part of their lives now, and he wasn't going to let that go. Roman took the mug, feeling the warmth seep into his hands. He took a careful sip, the familiar taste grounding him as his thoughts swirled. Lena and Lucian. The life they had now was so different from the one he had imagined for himself. Yet, sitting here in this small apartment, it felt like the start of something new. "Thanks," Roman said, his voice low, almost reverent. "This is nice, you've done a great job with everything." Lena smiled faintly, her eyes softening as she looked at him. "It's not much, but it works for us." Roman's gaze lingered on Lucian for a moment, watching as the little boy babbled and pulled at his mother's hair with surprising determination. The simplicity of the moment, the quiet, the ordinary, the messiness of life, it hit Roman in a way he hadn't expected. This was real life. This was family. "I'd never thought I'd get to see this," Roman admitted, the words coming out before he could stop them. "I never thought I'd get to be part of this. I thought I'd lost that chance forever." Lena's expression shifted slightly, and she gave him a careful look. "I know it's not easy, Roman. I know it's been complicated." She shifted Lucian on her lap as she continued. "But you're here now, and that's what matters." Roman swallowed hard, his emotions swirling. There were still so many things he hadn't said, so many things he wasn't sure how to say. He didn't know how to bridge the gap between the father he thought he was and the grandfather he had to become. But looking at Lena, looking at Lucian, he knew he had to try. "I want to be here, Lena, not just for Lucian but for you too," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I don't know how to make up for lost time, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to be part of your life, to be part of both of your lives." Lena met his gaze, and for a moment, there was silence. The weight of the past hung in the air, but so did something new, something tentative but real. "I don't know what that looks like yet," Lena said, her voice soft. "But I'm willing to figure it out, one step at a time." Roman nodded, feeling a sense of relief, even if it was just a small one. For the first time, it felt like they were building something, slowly, piece by piece. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't without its complications, but it was real, and that was enough for now. Lucian made a happy gurgling noise, reaching for Roman's hand, his tiny fingers curling around his finger. Roman looked down at the baby, and for the first time, he didn't feel like an outsider. There was a connection, a bond, however fragile, that was starting to take root. Lena caught his gaze, her eyes filled with something like understanding, maybe even hope. "I think he likes you," she said with a small, teasing smile. Roman chuckled, his heart full. "Well, I certainly like him." As they sat there together, the world outside seemed to slow down. The noise, the chaos, it all faded away, and Roman felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. One small step, one quiet moment at a time. Lena nodded slowly, her eyes filled with a quiet sadness. "I don't know for sure, but it seems like there was something between them, something more than just friendship. From the way he talks about her, it sounds like they were close, maybe even more than that." Roman's mind spun. He had never suspected anything between Lily and Julian. They'd always been friends, sure, but nothing more. But the letter, there was so much unspoken in it, so much he couldn't yet understand. It felt like the ground beneath him was shifting, like everything he thought he knew about his past and his relationship with Lily was now in question. "I can't believe this," Roman muttered, staring at the letter as if it held the answers to 1,000 unasked questions. "I trusted Julian. He was like a brother to me." Lena reached out, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "I know this is a lot. I didn't want to be the one to tell you, but I thought you should know. I didn't want to keep any more secrets." Roman looked up at her, his eyes clouded with confusion and hurt. Why didn't Lily tell me? If it was so important to her, if it was so deep, why keep it from me? Why keep all of this from me, including you? Lena let out a long, steadying breath. "I don't know, Roman. I think she was scared. She was always afraid of losing you, of losing everything, and maybe she thought if she kept it all hidden, it would protect us both. I think she thought that if you knew, it would ruin everything." Roman closed his eyes for a moment, trying to steady himself. It wasn't just the idea of Lily and Julian. It was the realization that there had been so much more hidden from him than he had ever known. His whole relationship with Lily had been based on trust, and yet, there were parts of her life he had never fully understood. He had built his whole future around the version of her he had known, the version she had presented. But now he wondered what other truths had been left out. "Did she love him?" Roman asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. His voice was raw, the vulnerability exposed in his words like a wound that wouldn't heal. Lena bit her lip, clearly uncomfortable with the question. "I think she did, in some way. Maybe she loved him in a way that wasn't the same as how she loved you, but I think there was something real there. Maybe she thought it was too late to go back, or maybe she thought you would never understand." Roman's throat tightened. The thought of Lily being torn between him and Julian, of her keeping this secret to protect him, it made his heart ache. And yet there was something in the letter, something about Julian's words that cut deeper than just the affair. "She never told me. She never gave me the chance to decide. She decided for both of us." Lena nodded. "I think she did. And I think that's why she kept it a secret for so long. She didn't want to lose everything, Roman. She loved you too. But she wasn't perfect. None of us are." Roman ran a hand over his face, the weight of the discovery threatening to crush him. "I don't know what to do with this, Lena. I thought I knew who she was. But this? It changes everything." "I know," Lena said quietly. "It changes everything. But you don't have to figure it out alone." Roman glanced over at her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt a sense of solidarity with her. She was here, trying to make sense of the same things, trying to navigate this painful revelation just like he was. They were both standing at the edge of a truth they hadn't expected, facing the ghosts of the past together. "I don't even know how to begin to process this," Roman admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "You don't have to process it all right now," Lena replied gently. "We don't have to figure it out today. Just take it one step at a time." Roman looked at her, at the strength she was showing despite the weight of everything she'd already carried. He realized in that moment that despite the confusion, despite the betrayal and hurt, he wasn't alone anymore. He had Lena, he had Lucian, and maybe, just maybe, they could all find a way forward together. The silence stretched between them again, but it felt different this time. Not heavy with unanswered questions, but full of the quiet possibility that, even after all the secrets, they might still be able to build something real. Roman's mind felt like a storm, thoughts swirling, emotions colliding, and yet, no clarity. It was almost as though his entire relationship with Lily had been a shadow, shaped by secrets he had never known about. How could he have been so blind? He had trusted her, believed in their connection, in their love. But now it felt like that love was built on a foundation of half-truths and silence. The mention of Julian, an old friend, only added to the confusion. Julian had been a part of his life for so long. He had been there during pivotal moments, a confidant, a trusted companion. The idea that Julian might have been involved with Lily in some way, that he might have kept something this significant from him, was a betrayal Roman couldn't yet understand. The letter had opened a floodgate of doubt, and no matter how much Roman tried to push it away, the questions gnawed at him. Had Julian loved Lily? Had she loved him back? Or was it a fleeting thing, something she'd tucked away to protect their family? He couldn't fathom the answers, and he wasn't sure if he ever would. As the days passed, Roman found himself withdrawing. He still spent time with Lena and Lucian, but it felt different. He was present physically, but mentally he was lost in the labyrinth of his own mind. Every conversation seemed to circle back to the same unresolved questions. Was his entire relationship with Lily a lie? And if it had been, what did that mean for everything else? One evening, as Roman was once again sitting in his study, surrounded by Lily's journals and letters, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Julian. The name on the screen almost made Roman's heart stop. He hadn't heard from Julian in years, and they hadn't exactly parted on the best of terms. He'd pushed him away when he'd needed him most, perhaps too much, perhaps in his own way trying to bury whatever had been left unresolved between them. Roman hesitated before opening the message, but when he did, his eyes widened. It was short, but it was enough. Roman, I need to talk. I don't know how much you know, but I owe you an explanation. If you're willing, I'm here. Roman's fingers hovered over the screen. He didn't know what to do with this. Julian's sudden reach out felt like the universe was forcing him to confront everything, all at once. Was Julian ready to confess? Was he going to explain everything that Roman had never been told? Roman didn't know if he could do it. Part of him wanted to just shut it all out, to ignore the past and focus on the present. On Lena and Lucian. They were his family now. They were the ones who mattered. But there was a part of him that still felt the pull of the past, the need to understand, to get answers. He took a deep breath, fingers trembling slightly, and typed a response. I'm listening. The reply came almost instantly. Can we meet? It's complicated, but I promise I'll explain everything. Roman stared at the screen for a long moment, the weight of the decision heavy in the air. He wanted to yell at Julian, to demand answers without having to face him. But he knew that if he wanted closure, if he ever wanted to move forward, he'd have to face the past first. He took another breath, steeling himself for whatever was to come. He typed back, where and when. Roman's grip on the phone tightened, his knuckles turning white as the words continued to echo in his mind. A mistake. He had heard that word before, but it never seemed to cover the full weight of what it meant when it came from someone he trusted. Julian's explanation felt hollow, like a half-hearted attempt to downplay something that had shaken Roman to his core. You know what I think? Roman's voice was barely above a whisper, but there was an edge to it, a rawness that he couldn't hide. You think you can just explain it away like that? I'm supposed to believe it wasn't what I think, after everything? After the letter you wrote to her? You never even told me, you just kept it from me? Julian sighed again, and Roman could hear the weight of his own regret in the sound. Roman, I never wanted to hurt you, and I never meant for it to get this complicated. I should have told you, I should have been honest. But back then we were all, we were all tangled up in things we didn't understand. I didn't know how to explain it to you. Roman felt his pulse quicken, the anger bubbling back to the surface. You didn't know how to explain it? It's that simple? He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. You knew exactly how to keep your distance when you needed to, but you couldn't bring yourself to tell me the truth. You and Lily. Did you love her, Julian? Was she just some fling to you, or was it more than that? Another long pause on the other end of the line, and when Julian spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost fragile. I did love her, Roman. I never stopped loving her. Roman's breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, he didn't know how to process the words. His mind whirled as he tried to piece it all together. Julian loved her? After everything that had happened, after losing Lily, after all the years of grief and confusion, hearing that sentence shattered something inside of him. You loved her, Roman repeated, his voice strained. But you never told me. You never told me that you were in love with my wife. And now you think you can just explain it all away with complicated? I never meant for you to find out like this, Julian said, his voice low and tired. I should have been honest with you, Roman. And I know there's no way to fix this now, but please understand, it wasn't what you're thinking. It wasn't an affair. It was something we both felt, but it was before you and Lily got together, before everything happened. It wasn't a betrayal, at least not like that. Roman felt the weight of his words, but it didn't take the sting away. The betrayal didn't feel any less real, no matter how Julian tried to frame it. His mind kept replaying the same questions. How long had this been going on? What had Lily truly felt? Was their marriage based on something he hadn't understood? Before we got together, Roman's voice faltered, disbelief flooding him. You were involved with her before we got together? And you think that changes anything? Julian's voice was quiet, but there was a sincerity in it that Roman couldn't ignore. It was long before you two ever became serious. It was one of those things that happened, but nothing happened after you and Lily got together. It was a mistake, Roman. We were both in a bad place. But when you and Lily fell in love, that was real. And I stepped away. I stayed away because I knew that's what she wanted, and it wasn't until later, after everything, after she had passed, that I realized how much I had never stopped feeling for her. Sophie. Roman's thoughts raced. So it had been before their marriage, before everything he thought he knew about his life with Lily. But the timing didn't change the fact that Julian had kept this secret from him for years. He'd kept this truth locked away, and now, after all this time, Roman was left to sort through the wreckage. "Joe, what now?" Roman's voice was raw, his anger now mixed with a heavy sadness. "What do you expect from me, Julian? Do you want forgiveness? Do you think you can just explain it all away with a few words, and that will be enough?" Julian didn't respond immediately, and for a long moment, Roman wondered if he would ever get the closure he needed. Finally, Julian spoke, his voice tinged with regret. "No, I don't expect forgiveness, Roman. I don't expect you to ever see me the same way. I just wanted you to know the truth. I've lived with the weight of it for years, and it's haunted me." Roman's breath hitched in his chest. His mind was screaming for answers, but in his heart, a part of him was exhausted. How many more truths did he need to hear? How many more revelations could he take before he finally broke? After a long pause, Roman spoke again, his voice quieter, more deliberate. "I don't know if I can ever understand what happened, Julian, but I think I need time to process all of this. I'm not ready to forgive you, not yet. I don't know if I ever will be, but I'm going to need some time to figure out what it all means." "I understand," Julian said softly. "I'm here when you're ready, but just know that I regret everything, every part of it." Roman hung up the phone with a feeling of finality, but it was a hollow kind of finality. He wasn't sure what he expected from the conversation. He wasn't sure if anything could ever fix what had been broken between them. All he knew was that the past, in its painful, complicated entirety, had come crashing down on him, and he wasn't sure how he could ever move forward from it. The weight of it all seemed almost unbearable. He looked at the phone in his hand, feeling an overwhelming emptiness inside. There were still so many questions he needed to answer, so many pieces that didn't fit together. But one thing was certain, he would have to rebuild his life, his relationships, with new understanding, even if that meant facing truths that were much harder than he could have ever imagined. Julian's voice softened, as if understanding the weight of Roman's words. "I get it. Take all the time you need. I'm here when you're ready." Roman held the phone to his ear for a moment, the silence between them stretching out. There was no comfort in Julian's apology, no satisfaction in the confession. It was just more of the same. More of the past unraveling, more of the threads falling apart. Roman could feel his grip on everything slipping, and though part of him wanted to scream, to demand more answers, he knew that wasn't the answer. Not now, not yet. He finally pressed the end call button and sat there in the stillness, the weight of everything crashing in on him. Lily. Julian. Secrets. Betrayals. His mind was a storm of disjointed thoughts and raw emotion. He had spent so long grieving Lily, thinking that the truth of their love had been pure, unblemished. And now it was like someone had shattered that image and left him with nothing but pieces. His eyes landed on the letter again, the one Lena had given him. He had tucked it away earlier, but now it felt like it was taunting him, reminding him that there were more questions than answers. He couldn't just walk away from it. He couldn't ignore it anymore. But where to go from here? He had no idea. There was so much left to untangle. How much of their relationship had been built on lies? How much of Lily's love had been real? And how much had been clouded by her past with Julian? The thoughts were suffocating, and Roman had to force himself to stand up, to move away from the heavy weight of the past pressing down on him. He walked over to the window, staring out at the city below, trying to clear his mind. It felt like everything was in flux. His memories of Lily, his relationship with Julian, his role in Lena's life, it was all slipping through his fingers. But one thing was clear. He couldn't let this consume him. He had to keep moving forward. Even if the truth didn't feel like a relief, even if it left him feeling empty, he had to find a way to heal. For Lena, for Lucian, for himself. The uncertainty was terrifying, but it was also the only thing he had left. Maybe that was a place to start. Time. He needed time. Time to process, to come to terms with everything that had been revealed and everything that still remained hidden. Roman looked down at Lucian, who was giggling, his tiny hands reaching out toward the trees and birds. There was something so pure about it, the innocence in his joy, that for a moment, all of Roman's burdens seemed to fade away. This, he thought, this is what matters. He glanced over at Lena, who was pushing the stroller with a quiet ease, a soft smile on her lips. The weight of their past was still there, but somehow it didn't feel quite so heavy in this moment. They were walking forward together, one small step at a time, and for the first time in a long while, Roman felt like he might have a place in their future. "You okay?" Lena asked, her voice breaking through his thoughts. She shot him a glance, her eyes warm, but still carrying the shadow of everything that had happened. Roman nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yeah, I'm okay. More than okay, actually." He smiled softly. "It's just peaceful, being out here with you guys." Lena gave him a small, knowing smile, her hand resting on the stroller's handle. "I'm glad. I've been thinking a lot about how much has changed too, about how hard everything has been, but also how we're still here. Still trying." Roman reached out and gently touched her arm, a silent gesture of gratitude. They had been through so much, so many revelations, so many secrets, but they were still walking this path together. That meant something. It meant a chance to build something new, something real. "I'm grateful for this," Roman said softly, glancing back at Lucian, who was now playing with the toy dangling from the stroller's handle. "For you, for him. I don't know if I can ever make up for all the time I lost, but I want to be here. For both of you." Lena's eyes softened and she stopped walking, turning to face him. "You're here now, and that's what matters. We'll figure out the rest, together, one day at a time, remember?" Roman met her gaze and nodded, feeling a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in years. The past couldn't be undone, but maybe, just maybe, the future could still be worth something. For the first time in a long time, he felt like there was hope. A glimmer of it anyway. And they continued their walk in silence, the sounds of the park around them, birds chirping, children laughing, filling the air. It was a simple moment, but it felt like everything Roman had been searching for. For the first time in a long time, Roman let himself feel it. Peace, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough for now. Roman looked at Lena, his chest tightening with emotion. The thought of being a bigger part of Lucian's life, of having a role in shaping his future, was something he hadn't dared hope for until recently. It was a gift, a second chance he had never expected to receive. "Of course I want to be," Roman said, his voice thick with sincerity. "I've never wanted anything more than to be here for him, for both of you." Lena's smile grew, a quiet relief in her eyes. She seemed to relax, her posture softening as if a weight had been lifted. Lucian, oblivious to the conversation, was still fixated on the ducks, his chubby hands reaching out toward them as though trying to touch the water. "I think he'd really like that," Lena said, glancing down at Lucian. "He's lucky to have you." Roman nodded, feeling an overwhelming sense of responsibility wash over him. He had missed so much of Lucian's early years, but now, with this newfound chance, he would do everything in his power to make up for it. "I'm lucky too," he replied, his gaze soft as he watched Lucian's innocent wonder. "I don't think I realized how much I was missing until now." Lena shifted slightly, her fingers gently brushing Lucian's hair back from his forehead. She looked back at Roman, her expression open and trusting. "It's not going to be easy, you know. We've both been through a lot, and there will still be hard days ahead. But I think we're in a good place, Roman. We're figuring it out." Roman felt his heart swell with gratitude, knowing that the road ahead might not always be smooth, but at least it wouldn't be a journey he would have to walk alone. Lena had extended her trust to him, and with that, he knew he had to honor it. "Home step at a time," Roman agreed softly. "We'll get there." They sat in quiet contentment, the sound of the lake lapping at the shore blending with the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze. Roman's thoughts drifted between the past and the present. But for the first time, he felt like he was ready to let go of the weight of everything he couldn't change. His place in their lives in this new chapter was still unfolding, but the possibilities felt endless. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, it could be enough. Roman sat back in his chair, his eyes following the changing colors of the sky, but his mind was fully anchored in the present. The past, with all its heartache and mistakes, seemed to fade into the background, replaced by something much brighter, a chance to be part of a family again. He'd spent so many years dwelling on what he had lost, but now, he was finally learning to embrace what he had found. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts, and when he opened it, he found Lena standing there, holding Lucian's hand as the little boy smiled up at him. "Hey," Lena said, her voice warm. "Lucian wanted to show you something." Roman smiled, his heart swelling as Lucian tugged at his hand, clearly excited about whatever it was he had in mind. Roman bent down to greet him, and Lucian pointed to his toy car. "Grandpa," Lucian said, his voice bright. Roman's chest tightened at the word, feeling a mix of emotions. He hadn't fully understood the impact of that title until now, but hearing it from Lucian felt like something sacred, something real. "You want to show me how it works?" Roman asked gently, his voice filled with a quiet awe. Lucian nodded enthusiastically, and with Lena's help, Roman settled down on the couch, his grandson on his lap, showing him how to make the little car race across the floor. The room was filled with laughter, with the sound of tiny hands clapping in joy, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Roman realized he wasn't alone anymore. "Thank you," Roman murmured to Lena, who had been watching the interaction with a tender smile. "For everything, for letting me be a part of this." Lena's smile softened, her eyes glimmering with an emotion Roman couldn't quite name. "We're in this together," she said simply. And in that moment, Roman understood exactly what she meant. They were building something, piece by piece, moment by moment. A life he hadn't imagined, but one that felt right. His past didn't define him, and the future, though uncertain, was a chance to create something better. As the evening settled in, with Lucian nestled in his arms and the city lights beginning to twinkle outside, Roman allowed himself to dream, something he hadn't done in a long time. This life, with Lena and Lucian, was his now, and he would fight for it, protect it, and cherish it with everything he had. The future was no longer a question of what had been lost, it was about what he was willing to embrace, and for the first time in years, Roman felt truly at home. Did you enjoy this story? If so, drop a like and leave a kind comment to encourage us. Your support means the world. And don't forget, we love you.